To equate spiritual with spirit or spiritualized is not to respect the context of the New Testament and the possibility of a variety of meanings for the word. For example, in Galatians 6:1, the Apostle Paul says, "And let those of you who are spiritual restore such a one." Is he saying, let those of you who have spiritualized bodies? No. But Mr. Deedat would have you understand that the word spiritual in 1 Corinthians 15 always must mean one and the same thing, namely spirit or spiritized. That's just bad exegesis. That's not respecting the context of the New Testament and the variation in the possibility of the uses of words. He tells us, for example, that when Jesus was betrayed, everyone fled, and so we have no eyewitnesses to his crucifixion. How do you know that? That is an assumption. The New Testament does not say, having fled, they stayed away. You have to assume that, and that is an assumption you make because it is one that somehow supports the position that you want to take. He wants to say about Jesus and Jonah. Was Jonah alive in the belly of the whale? Yes. And so was Jesus alive? He wants to talk about threes and so on. I'll tell you the answer to the sign, Mr. Deedat. It is that Jonah was entombed. It happened to be in a fish. And Jesus was entombed. It happened to be in the earth. The issue is not three. The issue is not dead or alive. The issue is entombment. I'm surprised to hear you admit, I think you admitted, that Jesus was in the tomb alive for 3 days. That's not standard Muslim doctrine. Standard Muslim doctrine is that Jesus' similitude or image somehow was imparted to someone standing nearby, and Jesus got away scot-free, and someone else was on the cross. Well, that is a Muslim interpretation, is it not, my friend? If you would look among your scholars, if you would look at the range of opinions and interpretations in Islamic theology, this is at least one perspective. Now, what's not being said to many of you people tonight, you Americans, is this: that Islam has a great divergency of perspectives on a variety of issues. But you're not going to hear that tonight. You're not going to learn that. What is said to you tonight by one man is in effect reported as that which all Muslims believe about a certain thing. And we could pick 100 subjects tonight and discover considerable diversity. Jesus was in the tomb 3 days alive. I'm astonished. What does 3 days equal, he asks. Well, I would suggest to you, what does 5 minutes equal? In Beirut, you'd better not take 5 minutes to mean 5 minutes on the clock, 60 seconds. Because it doesn't. Can you repair my shoes? Yes. When will they be ready? 5 minutes. It means a little while. It's very imprecise. You want to ask me, Dr. Douglas, how much time did you spend in Lawrence, Kansas? 2 days. When did you arrive? 2 o'clock Thursday. When did you leave? 9 o'clock Friday. That hardly sounds like 48 hours. But it is 2 days. For that is the way we use language, and that is the way the writers of the New Testament use language. And so you see, it's to trivialize the thing, to come along and in effect begin to clip down days and ask, what's really going on here? You have to respect the context, the setting, the way people in their own cultures deal with issues and subjects and so on and so forth. All right, having said all of that, let me go on to say what I want to say. Namely, that the Holy Book points almost from its beginning to the crucifixion, to the death, and to the resurrection of Jesus. I cannot develop these in detail for you, and so I run the risk of appearing foolish in the process, but I invite you to look at them nonetheless. In the Holy Book, Genesis 22, we are told of Abraham offering his son. Muslims believe it was Ishmael. The book of Genesis says it was Isaac. That's another question altogether. But in the course of this, Isaac the son, as this text says, asked, "Where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham says, "God will provide the lamb, my son." Abraham ties his son and prepares to slit his throat. And the Lord intervenes and points him to a ram, to an animal. And the Lord said, "Because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will bless you." This is an allegory, a type, an analogy, a true historical event also, pointing to the nature of God as a God willing, as it were, to provide the lamb of sacrifice, which Jesus is identified as being. "Behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world," says John the Baptist when he first encounters Jesus. Similar things turn up at the Passover in the book of Exodus, in the 12th chapter. There the people are called upon to take a lamb for the family. This lamb is to be without defect. It must be slaughtered. And God says, "On that night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both men and animal, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be for you a sign on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you." Again, recall that the affirmation of the New Testament is that Jesus is the Lamb of God. And the writing of the Apostle Paul, which says, "Christ, our Paschal or Passover Lamb, is offered." Now, either Jesus is the Lamb of God, either Jesus is the Passover Lamb on the type of the lamb offered in Egypt that prevented the death angel from slaying, or the scriptures that the Christians and the Jews have are unreliable. And if they are unreliable, I submit to you tonight that God has failed. Because God said His word would not pass away. God said He would preserve His word. God said no one can change His word. In the Day of Atonement, as described in Leviticus 16, again, an analogy drawn out of the history of the Jews. On that particular day, an animal, in fact, two animals, play different roles. One becomes, in effect, the sacrifice for the sins of the people. The other, while living, comes to carry all of the sins of the people far away into a lonely place where that sin no longer is present for them to have to confront moment by moment and day by day. In the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, chapters 9 and 10, in a very extensive sort of way, the idea is developed that Jesus is both the priest and the sacrifice, the one who cancels and removes sin. The prophets spoke as well. One quick example from the book of Isaiah. Now I understand that Mr. Deedat will be tempted to say that's an interesting prophecy, but where does it say that it has anything to do with Jesus? Well, it doesn't in the book of Isaiah. I mean, after all, Isaiah lived 700 years before Jesus came along. But as you come to the writing